your homework tonight, I would more than understand because this is thick stuff. So Andy, it's gonna be up to you to distill this whole thing down into something that us common folk can understand.
I got a
That'll
question
change the
before you start,
slides.
Andy.
Yes.
Could you explain to us what your mission was before you started?
Well, I got signed up in April, and so it's been 6 months now of, I mean, obviously I'm not going where the wind takes me, but we've spent a lot of time with our guys up here and got our hands dirty and boots dirty and took samples and got to know the operators really well and saw the place was running and investigated things and kind of figured out what was wrong with the place.
There you go. So the idea of the beginning is you're looking for something that's wrong with the plant, correct?
Right.
Okay, that was your initial idea to go out there and figure out what's wrong with it.
Yes.
What is it that you knew that made you think there was something wrong with it?
Well, there's 4 things, A, B, C, D. And
Okay.
so I'm going to walk you through those
Well, you're gonna
4
tell us
things.
now.
Absolutely.
Works for me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So slide number 1, it's in front of you right now. So the existing wastewater treatment plant has problems A, B, C, and D, which causes the cease and desist. The cease and desist has odor complaints, high BOD, which is carbon in the percolation basins, and overflowing percolation basins in the past. Okay? So the problems A, B, C, and D are the following. A, there's really not a consistent place to put the water. Even though the water is kind of dirty and that's causing some issues, even if the water was clean, the soil is clogged and there's not enough percolation area to put the water in the percolation area.
Water was clean, couldn't we ship it somewhere?
Yes, I'm getting there. That's solution number 3, I believe it is.
Okay, good enough.
Okay. B, as in Bravo, is the basins are leaking off-site. None of the basins are lined, and the basins are way up high. And so water that goes in, sewage, domestic sewage, and industrial wastewater, 3 times in the last 4 years, it's actually leaked through the sidewalls off the property into the river.
Including this year,
Including this year.
summer's peccadillo.
I didn't realize the ponds were supposed to be lined. I thought the idea was for them to percolate some of the water into the soil.
That's the downstream way that you're managing the effluent. Once the water's been treated, you put it in the ground. But the treatment plant,
So this is the primary.
And
Yes.
you're right and you're wrong. Lining would be the sides, perking would be the bottom, and we wouldn't have to line the
So
bottom.
you would line the sides to prevent the leakage?
There's options,
And
different
assuming that the water wouldn't leak from the bottom horizontally, it would go down.
Correct.
generally the regional board makes you line these basins. It's $1.50 a square foot. It's not the end of the world to line the basins.
Curious.
Yeah. So C is in Charlie. There's insufficient and inefficient treatment systems. So you've got no headworks. There's no screens. You can't remove the debris, the condoms, the food, everything that's in the water ends up in the basins. These guys have to put boots on, go out there, pull it off of the equipment, put it in a bag. That's inefficient. It's also inefficient to have 20 surface aerators with 15% efficiency and spend $600,000 a year in power and oxygen. There's ways to make it more efficient and more effective. And D, which was kind of surprising, something we kind of learned throughout the process, is Premier uses an industry standard sampling system. They have a tube that pulls a sample into a composite sampler and looks at that sample, and it's been automated. And so the data that they get off that sampler is inaccurate. That's because the tube is too small and the debris can't get in the tube. And we went there 3 times and the debris, the solids leaving Premier were 10 times what's been reported.
It's a big red
So when
flag.
they're taking these samples, they're looking for what?
Well, suspended solids, the tomato solids and dirt solids.
In the pond.
No, is that the plant,
the
this is at Premier
facility.
Brands.
This is at their
This is
primary-
what's leaving them coming to us. So their waste goes through a DAF unit. It's supposed to be the last thing in
So
line.
they're taking their tests there on site.
Correct.
And then giving you this information which you find to be insufficient because of the fact that it's such a small, minute amount that doesn't really reflect the major problem.
We took our own samples.
The information
3
needs to be
times.
when-
Which contradicted theirs.
10x, yeah.
I got it,
Yeah,
okay.
10x. And so that's an enormous amount of load. It's actually 90% of the load in the summer going into Escalon's plant, solids-wise,
Wow.
is from Premier.
That's huge.
So those are the 4 problems, Ed. Any other questions on that slide? I'm going to take you through those 4 in a little
I
bit more
hope you don't
detail.
mind, but I really want to understand this.
Yeah,
That's why I'm asking.
Absolutely. So problem A, no place to put the water. So the 2000 permit won't allow you to take effluent from the domestic and put it in the industrial perk ponds, or industrial and put it in the domestic perk ponds.
What's the
See-
reasoning?
Excuse me?
What's the reasoning?
There is no reasoning. I mean, they have 2 separate permits, industrial and domestic. They always kept them separate. But we don't need to keep them separate. Manteca doesn't keep them separate. Ripon doesn't keep them separate. Lathrop doesn't keep them separate. We don't need to keep
Just
them
what the
separate.
states tell us we have to do.
The
Or
state-
it's.
It was written
it's the way-
19 years ago.
it's-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way the original permit was set up.
So there's a possibility we could change that.
Correct.
Yeah, and we tried that. We called Sacramento, and definitely our new permit's gonna change it, we think, no problem. But we're trying to get a variance on the existing permit. That's something you could do next year, actually.
Which would increase the volume we have.
It would, yeah, because the domestic could be overflowing.
I know the
Got it.
situation.
Secondly, there's shallow clogging from the algae, the inorganic silt, and the organic sludge. You're putting a lot of material, solids and dissolved organics on top of the percolation basins, and it clogs quickly. And secondly, there's deep clogging. Okay? So even though you dry them, you rip them, scarify them, it's a lot of maintenance and a lot of effort, but we're still not having consistent percolation that we need. One piece of good news we did find out during the study is on this next slide here, and that is we went out and we put in level sensing equipment to measure the groundwater underneath the percolation basins. And fortunately, it was about 20 to 25 feet below, the groundwater was 20 to 25 feet below the percolation ponds. That means the groundwater is not mounding and restricting the water from going down. So
It's
we're
the
happy to
sludge.
learn that. It's the
sludge
sludge.
that's stopping it.
Sludge and just a lack of area. You have to drain 4.5 inches per day in order to get rid of the water
And the groundwater you're referring to is the water in the ground.
in the ground below the percolation
Natural
basins.
flow of water there.
Well, I don't know if it's natural. You've been mounding water from the
So that water
percolation.
you think is from it's a byproduct of the process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So is it trapped in there or what?
Well, it eventually flows into the Stanislaus River.
It does migrate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that
Because
fairly
it's higher
typical-
than the river.
Is that fairly typical, about 25, 30 feet, or is it probably varies wildly with the treatment plants?
It varies wildly, but I think that's a lot. Usually it's less than that.
Okay, so
Around here it
that's-
is.
That's,
Yeah.
that's good news,
Yeah.
in other words.
Yep, it is. So then problem B, once again, the basins are leaking off-site. If you look here at this photograph, you're standing on top of the treatment plant, and you're looking down this hill towards the Stanislaus River, and water's coming out of the ground. This is basically industrial wastewater going into the river, and we're having to pump it, dam it up, pump it back into the plant.
Well, just for clarification, it didn't make it to the river.
Thank you, thank you. Toward the river, toward the river.
So we're not expecting any fines from,
No,
okay.
everybody was notified, it was all, and it never made it to the river, so it was just going that direction.
And then problem C, the processes need an upgrade to consistently improve reliable and cost-effective treatment. So as I said before, there's no screening initially to take any of the debris out of the water. The surface aeration, we could save a fortune if we fix that.
Let me ask you about the screening process.
Sure.
The screening process is at the inlet, I assume.
Yes,
And these screens are like grates?
yes. Well, I mean, there's different sizes, Ed, but generally speaking in the industry, you want to go with about 1/4 of an inch openings.
Now, how frequently do those have to be cleaned?
They are automated cleaning.
Oh, that's nice.
Yep, and they go into a bagger unit. It's completely sealed, no flies, no
You don't
odor.
have to touch anything.
Right.
Beautiful.
Secondly, as I said before, the surface aeration. There's a picture of the aeration. You guys, I don't know if you've been to the plant, but there's 20 of those guys, and they sit on top and they just throw water up in the air.
Aerated.
Yeah, but much better way to do it would be to take an efficient blower and put air into the bottom of the basin and oxygen in the bottom of the basin and let it percolate up. You can get over double the amount of efficiency. And then thirdly, this is kind of interesting, is that we are suggesting automated solids removal. Right now, the solids accumulate, and over the course of the summer, they fill up 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot deep. Then you let them sit there for 6 months while the wind blows and all the stuff, and there's odors. Instead, what you want to do is you want to have an engineered clarifier. You always take the solids out, you process them, you dry them, and you drive them off to be land applied.
How does that compare to the cost of letting them do it the way they're doing it now?
I think it's the same.
So we're getting a better situation, automated, less chance of odor and problems with the neighbors at the same cost.
Yes.
No brainer. Okay.
Andy, before you go on.
Yes, please. Thank you. The food's here. Okay, so I've got food here today. So I don't know, we can, after we get through it a little bit at 7 o'clock, if you guys want to take a break, just go ahead and call it, and there's food back there.
That'd
for
be good.
everybody.
But I think she's waiting for.
Oh, she is? Okay. Excuse me, just one second.
Clear off, buddy. Get your money.
Sorry, I don't have it on me.
I mean, it sounds like, Justin, like you would probably be able to answer this question, especially with problem C. the whole odor issue with Del Rio somehow gets wrapped up in solid
Well, a
waste
lot of it
as well.
takes us away. The two things I think are some of the biggest, the aeration. I mean, how can you, if you think about it, so this is just throwing shit in the
Yeah,
air.
yeah, no,
How
yeah.
is that not creating odors, first of
Yeah,
all? And then,
yeah.
of course, when the solids are sitting there and it's grabbing, how is it not grabbing it, taking
Yeah.
it that way? If it
Well, any
eliminates those.
aeration you use is gonna create some odor.
Exactly.
And then it's costing us, what, $600,000 a year for 15% efficiency?
Yeah.
And then, but are most of these solids that you're dealing with by the end of summer, can you say the majority of them are from Premier, or are they just generally collected, or?
About half are from Premier, because the other half are bacteria that eat all the stuff you can't see.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
That's a good thing.
so then problem D, which is the last one, here's a photograph, which is kind of interesting. TSS is 10 times reported, and I'm not blaming anybody because I think it was just the way they were sampling. But if you look there on the far left, that's just a sample taken off of what's being sent to your plant. And you can see there's almost 10% of that jar is tomatoes.
And that's coming, okay.
And remember, you're supposed to have 300, which is 0.03% solids, which is in your permit.
But yet Eckerd's is pretty clean
Eckert's is pretty clean in that sample, yeah.
in that sample, I like that.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to the 5 solutions that we want to propose, okay? So there's 5 steps that we think that are needed for relief from the CDO, long-term reduction in operations and maintenance cost, and to improve reliability. So number 1, we want to do, as we talked about a little bit ago, we want to combine the percolation sections immediately. They're going to the same place. They're going in the ground. They're going to the same place. Why can't we use them how we want to? Number 2, we want to better treat the flows in the water and send it to SSJID. We talk to them. They'll take it in the summer. As long as it's properly treated, filtered, disinfected, they will take it.
Will we get money for it?
I didn't ask that question. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be too easy.
Yeah, I don't think likely, probably not. It'd be down the road.
think
So,
they're-
let me ask
yeah.
you this, we're giving the water because it's gonna help us get rid of it, and they're getting it for nothing.
Well, we would have to negotiate
Yeah.
that when we get to that point too.
I'm just curious how it works, I'm not suggesting wrong or right, I just wanna know the facts.
I don't think that stone was, if I recall your report, I don't think that was, they weren't called yet at the time.
Well,
Or they were-
we've talked to them, they're open to the idea.
Right, but that's as far as
But
it
there's
went.
not been any kind of, I haven't had any talks in particular regarding if they would pay us for the water, and I don't think,
I didn't. I talked to Forrest at length. I didn't talk to him about that. I know some of my other clients, like the city of Solvang, for example, the people that they're trying to sell it to, they might be willing to pay what their costs are just to get water, raw water, which might be pretty low, but it's something.
Yeah, exactly, the quality of the water, now, is it gonna be acceptable for irrigation? And is it gonna be
Absolutely.
Limited for what it can be irrigated with?
Unrestricted reuse, if we do what I'm suggesting, which is oxidation, filtration, disinfection.
Got it, okay, so it's worth something, water is a premium. I
Absolutely.
don't care what they say and how it, because we all know that water is getting harder and harder to get a volume of it.
Right.
And we've been throwing it away basically. Now, if we can recycle it, it's gonna take some load off the other sources of water, which is gonna help everybody.
Right.
So it's gotta be worth something, is my point.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, even if you can get $100 or $150 an acre foot, it actually sums up to
It adds
quite a
up.
bit. Yeah,
It helps pay the
does.
cost.
It's a sharp stick in the eye.
You got it. And also,
You don't wanna sign for it? You could
Andy,
sign
how many
for it.
gallons a year do
They
you
put
think
smiley
it's
faces.
possible that we would be recycling?
So I'll get there, Ed, if you don't mind. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. You're good. You're good. Okay, so let's see. Combine the percolation. That's number 1. Number 2, send some flows to SSJID. We want to send as much as we can. I'm going to talk about that. Number 3, this is a very important point. If we're going to do something here, let's just do it once, not twice. Let's build one plant.
I like it.
Everybody else does it. And secondly, this is really important, is that the industrial bugs are nutrient starved. So they don't have enough nitrogen, they don't have enough phosphorus, they actually need some of that stuff the domestic would help them with. I didn't even think about that until we started doing the biological modeling, and all of a sudden spitting out all these problems, and so that solves it. Number 4, we have to get better pretreatment at Premier, and number 5, we want to process and handle the solids automatically, okay? So I'm going to walk through those 5.
Perfect.
So here's kind of an image of what we would propose in a perfect world to renovate the percolation basins. Instead of having all these basins that are small and big and medium and the water's hard to kind of move around, Justin, we would have 8 about equally sized basins with a hub in between each one. And so anyway, you'd be able to basically
With a
send
what between each one, please?
a hub. So all the effluent would go to one of two hubs, which is in the center of 4 quadrants.
Like a junction.
Yes. And
So
from
the
there,
junction distributes.
that's right.
Got it.
And you could dry one of them, scrape it.
Got it.
Yeah, okay. And there's 2 hubs.
Got it.
Whether we do this improvement or not, which is close to $350,000, I don't know if we need to. We're gonna get through the options in a little bit, but in a perfect world, we would do this. But at a minimum, we're gonna combine where we can put the water. Number 2, as you can see there on the map, there's Escalon's wastewater plant, there's the SSJID canal. 3,000 feet of piping would get us over there. And it would be allowed, according to Forest, if we meet the state's Title 22 standards: oxidation, filtration, and disinfection.
Do we need a lift station?
Yes, unfortunately, we looked at that. Yep. Number 3, we want to combine the treatment process. So here's an image that we've overlaid of a planning level where combined flows would come in here to the laser pointer. I don't know if you guys can't see that, can you?
Yeah.
So basically on the top part there, that's where the headworks or the screening would be. The water would flow down into 3 basins. Those basins have enough capacity, they're lined basins, and it's balanced earthwork. That would give you enough capacity for what you do today, plus about another close to 15%. If you put on a 4th basin, you could treat another 20%. So that's why the 4th basin's kind of grayed out there. Then it would flow down into these clarifiers where we take all the solids out. The clean water flows through to that box at the bottom where you filter, disinfect, send it to SSJID, and any water that you don't do that then flows over to the percolation basins. Okay? So 1 treatment plant. And you can build that off to the side of the existing operation, assuming the state let you put the domestic water in the industrial part during construction.
What's the likelihood?
I think it's pretty good because it's only 10% of the load.
Okay.
So. Okay. Number 4, here's a picture at Premier of this huge stainless steel treatment unit called the DAF unit, dissolved air flotation. They put air in it. It's supposed to lift up the tomato and dirt solids. They scrape it off. They take the clean water and they send it to the city. This piece of equipment's getting overwhelmed.
Is it antiquated?
It's not antiquated. It's actually a good piece of equipment. It's
Just
too small,
overused.
way too small. And plus it's down. It was down twice this summer. So you're actually getting 0 treatment on 2 times.
You know, Andy, any time you talk about, okay, maybe do this for Premier or with Premier or that at Premier Brands, have you had experiences in the past where you're dealing with a private industry, municipality, and how do you convince that private industry to do some of these things? Like, for example, put in a second DAF.
Well, Robert, all we're trying to do here is get them to sort of meet the existing agreements that we already have.
Gotcha.
We already agreed to 300 TSS. Just give us that.
Okay.
And I actually, during one of the site visits, one of their engineers was on site and they were actually talking. He mentioned to me that they were talking about putting in a second unit.
Okay.
So that was good news.
They know there's an issue too.
I believe so.
And they're falling
so.
short on the day, right? And they're falling short on even the existing agreement in terms of how many solids they're sending down,
Well,
right?
so based on the existing agreement and the way that the testing was called out for, they've been compliant. So we need to change, because it was an industrial standard testing that we've told them to do. So we need to change it, the way that they test it, so that it gives us a better picture of it.
And
So-
you'll start doing that as soon as this next year's permitting process for them?
Correct.
Okay, okay.
And there are additional charges for the TSS. So they can continue to send what they're sending and it would just be a different rate sheet.
Sure,
So-
okay.
And then, I mean, just as a backup, in a perfect world, not only would you put in a second one of those units, but you'd also have a backup insurance screen so you meet what you're gonna do.
Where does the
Redundancy.
incentive come for them in terms of this upgrade or this more efficient way of dealing with this? Is it through us raising fees? Is it through us notifying them and telling them we won't accept it otherwise? Or how's that go?
I think, I'm just gonna repeat what I just said, but just agree to what we've already agreed to,
In other
so,
words, we have an agreement in place that's not being met.
right.
Okay,
Right.
good enough.
Right. And then number 5, this is probably a little bit less important, but still important, is that we would suggest, and this is a picture right here of the Oakdale facility right here, where on the top of that chute is coming dry, sand-like solids. They drop into a dumpster or a truck, and the trucks drive off. Depending on how, the season's going and how much flow we have, different number of trucks drive off. We've estimated that in the report.
Is
But,
that a toxic substance that has to be put some special place?
It's a biosolid. EPA has 3 different classes of biosolid, and in our base proposal, the minimum cost, it might have to go to a landfill, but as you do a little bit more processing, you can get it to Class B, you can land apply it. Class A, you can pretty much do whatever you want
But
with.
that's not our situation, that's theirs.
That'd be our situation.
This would be,
Yes, this would be the city situation.
this out at the plant.
Yeah, so not only is Premier gonna reduce their solids, but then out of the plant, we're gonna automatically remove all the solids from the bacteria. We're gonna press them, dewater them, and we're gonna haul them somewhere.
After the screening process.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, after the screening, after the biological, after the filtration, after the clarifiers.
What's left?
It's just
I mean,
clean
that's
water.
what's left.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the final, okay.
Absolutely.
Would that be, can you get them to like field grade where you can spread them over in an orchard?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, I
really?
mean, yeah, and so I'll get to what the alternatives are here next. So now we looked at alternative 0, which is doing nothing, or just upgrading what we have. And then we looked at 6 other alternatives. 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 2C, and 3. 3 is the perfect situation. So if we could get 3.5 million gallons of capacity, enough for Escalon and Eckerd and everybody else for the rest of the time, we get drying to Class A biosolids. That's alternative 3. I'm pretty much sure we're not gonna do alternative 3 right now. But I
Just for
wanted
the
to-
sake of argument, alternative 3, what are you looking at lifespan for something like that?
A long time. I mean, this facility, the cast-in-place concrete and the liners and the stainless steel pipe, I mean, it's got a 50 to 75-year life cycle. The
Yeah.
equipment obviously has a little bit
Right,
less, but
yeah.
What
Okay.
kind of a price tag goes with it?
I'll get there in just one sec. I'm almost there. So then the do-nothing approach has the following problems. Number 1, SSJID won't accept the current effluent. That's a big deal. We gotta get rid of the water. Number 2, there's a continued risk of high percolation basins level. That's kind of the same thing. Number 3, continued odors. Number 4, the industrial water treatment is nutrient deficient. That's why we're discharging high organics into the percolation basins. And number 5, there's insufficient redundancy or safety factor. They had a basin out of service this year, and their levels of carbon went up high. Okay? So here it is right here, guys. So on this slide, it's a lot going on, but alternative 1A and 1B are sort of the minimum number of features and the minimum safety factor out on the site to get to 3 MGD. Remember, today you have 2.6 MGD coming in the summer. I'm allowing the domestic to go up another 1,000 EDUs, plus Eckerd another 0.15 MGD to get to 3 MGD in alternative 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, or 2C. So 3 MGD for those. And the one on the left there, 1A, that's no SSJID. That's just fixing the percolation ponds. 1B is the minimum treatment requirements and sending half the flow to SSJID.
When you're referring to 1A, 1B, what are we looking at? I'm looking at your chart here. I see A, B, and all the way down to M. What is 1A?
Look at the top of the chart there. You've got 6 columns.
I see across the top.
You got it?
Got
Okay.
it, got
Thank
it.
you.
Highlighted.
I got it, okay. Went across the top. So 1A was again the do nothing?
No, 0 is do nothing. I don't even have a cost for that.
Okay.
Okay? So 1A is do everything I showed you on that plan view for a new treatment plant, but send all the water to the percolation basins and upgrade the percolation basins.
No SSJID.
That's right. And this number, by the way, includes, as you can see, contractor overhead 20%, design, permitting, construction management 12%, 15% contingency. All that stuff's in there to get to this yellow number. But 1A, once again, as Justin said, no SSJID. 1B is the minimum stuff needed, and it includes sending half the flow to SSJID, a 12-inch diameter pipe, a pump station, as you suggested, and we get half the flow there.
Both these plans are, we've already combined the domestic
Yes.
and
All 6 of these are
everything we're
combined.
combining,
Yes.
okay.
And then 2A gets you additional features and safety factor and return pump stations and odor control and buildings and things like that. 2B is what I'm recommending, which is sending half the flow to SSJID and give yourself some safety factor. 2C is doing SSJID and the percolation basins. And as I said before, alternative 3 is the granddaddy.
Now, the 16 million,
Yes.
it is. The 16 million plus 900, whatever, I mean, between those two, there's not that much difference to me, but my point would be this. Percentage-wise, of that, is that all one-time amount of money that has to be in place?
Yes.
Okay, so next question is, what portion of it is the city versus the commercial side of it?
Okay, so I'm gonna go to the
Industrial
next,
side.
I'm gonna go to the next slide here. And this is how you might pay for it. So 2B, once again, if I go back, is $16.3 million. Obviously, financing is pretty inexpensive right now, but let's just say you can get, 2% financing or something. You might need close to $20 million over 20 or 30 years, right? 30 years, we'll call it. So you go to this slide right here, and number one, the OpEx is gonna go down. It's gonna go down at least 0.25 million a year. So that's at least $5 million in savings in 20 years. Number two, 0.25 million gallons a day of domestic expansion. That's 1,000 units at $6,100 a unit in 2007 connection fee costs, which should be higher than that. That's $6.1 million. And then the 0.15, because Eckert wants to expand, assuming you charge them 2 times the city's domestic connection fee, because they have more load, that would be another 7.3. 5 plus 6 plus 7, it gets you pretty close. And then there's SRF grant funding available for a project like this.
Andy, let me back up, that 0.25 MGD, because I was reading that page too, and that's, you say that's the equivalent of about 1,000 additional EDUs coming into town,
Yes.
right? Okay,
50 units a year for 20 years.
all right, just want to clarify.
Because of the modernization, automation.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have that capacity. As soon as you pay that 16 million, you'd have that extra.
After the work's been done.
Say it again?
After the work's done,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, the work's gotta be done, that's true.
of course. You're not paying it bingo, it's gotta work for you. Okay, so, what you're saying in essence is if we did all this, we have offsets. And these offsets would finance it by savings, through savings.
I mean, that's one way to do it. There's grant funding, Prop 1 funding, there's state revolving fund money. I mean, there's different ways to do it. Bond,
With these savings you're referring to, there still has to be the initial 16 million plus.
Right.
And that's what we have to focus on in terms if we're gonna consider this at that 2A or 2B, whatever it was.
2B, yeah.
To be, or not to be, but to be, and that would do what to our current rates?
So I think what you were suggesting, Andy, was that instead of just doing like the 16.3 million, you would do 20 million that would assist you in getting those payments until you collect those developer
Yep.
fees.
Right.
So you,
Let's back up, developer fees from where?
so
Next
once it's built and it's in place, and then you start, if you do annexations, such as he was saying in the 20 years, 50 houses a year and over 20 years is where the 1,000 houses would get you.
And we traditionally do not build anywhere near that traditionally annually for any amount of time. So that number to me doesn't seem to work. Okay, what you're saying in essence is, if we develop or annex land or start doing some developing, and we're able to stabilize a 50 house per year, it'll cover the cost. Well, A, that's never gonna happen. You're never gonna have 50 homes a year for 20 years in this town. That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't plan on that with the
That
mindset of
does
this
not work in this
community.
equation, okay? I mean, it's not even feasible. If you look at our history alone, we've had what, about, I forget how many homes we had in the last couple of years. It wasn't much. And my point is, that's far-fetched. So let's go to something that's more realistic. That is not realistic for me.
Well, let me ask you this question, Andy. Alternative 2B and 2C, there already will be a number of improvements on those. And what I'm trying to do is trying to find out, risk versus reward. In other words, if you factored in, okay, if the present size of the community, if you project it forward, and still you're gonna have, let's say, the projected size of the community 10, 20, 30 years from now, and if they're paying this whole thing through their fees, okay, on their own, okay, without counting on the growth. Basically, if you have growth, that's a bonus, okay, in terms of, more people paying into with the developer impact fees. But if you don't plan on that, what do you think the overall lifespan of the alternative 2 and B and C would be with that plan?
Well, I thought I'd share with you maybe this a few minutes ago. I think it's, well over 50 years for the major infrastructure. And the
Even
operations and
under
maintenance
2B and
cost
2C?
takes into consideration routine maintenance of the equipment and keeping the equipment up to speed.
Yeah, because I think that's what we're looking at on some of these other things that we're doing now in town. You're talking about a 20-year loan for that lift station that's going to be 30-plus years. Basically,
True.
You're going to bite a little bullet, for a while, but you're going to be getting something that's going to far outlast
Right.
that loan. Which hopefully will give a future council, a future city government at some point down the road, will start thinking ahead and saving up because, they will eventually have to replace what we're doing now. but at least they'll have time to do it, instead of being under the gun like we are
I
now.
don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
My problem again is a funding source. I mean, we have to be realistic how we're gonna fund this thing. And,
Yeah, but that's why I think that's why you asked the question, what would be the burden if you had, let's say, 16.3 or 16.9, or like you say, 20 million? What would be the burden on assuming the existing population, if you have, let's say, a 30-year loan, how would that work how would that work in the rates?
yeah,
Yeah, that's a big question.
it's not a big question.
That's probably a lot of math.
It's gonna be a
Yeah.
big shock.
Andy, thanks
Might
for
be.
coming out
Yeah,
tonight.
thanks.
Sorry,
Thanks for
I
joining
thought it
us.
started at 6:30. I tried to get over here. So what would be the cost if we do nothing? What could be the cost? Because obviously the cost to maintain the facility, continue to put it together with baling wire and duct tape is gonna be a cost. And so sometimes you either fix something or you continue to pay for it over and over again. And over 20 years, what are we gonna pay for this thing?
Well, for starters, the operations and maintenance costs, as point number 1 says right here, is gonna be an extra $5 million just in power and oxygen alone.
That's $5
Secondly-
million that we're just gonna pay to maintain this thing if we do nothing.
Right,
There's a cost right there, okay?
5 million over how long?
over 20 years, at least.
Okay.
And then at point 4 there, obviously you have fines and whatever the CDO is worth to you guys in a moratorium, that's got value as well. Those are the minimum.
Yeah.
And then, it's difficult to continue to operate this thing and keep it together.
Yeah, right. That is a discussion to be had is if we do nothing and say, I personally think it's a benefit to certain ideologies in the town to not have a efficiently operating wastewater treatment plant because it keeps the growth at bay. If you can't expand, if you don't have 1,000 EDUs, then you cannot annex land and you cannot go to developers for those fees.
Peter, we have 250 as we speak today.
I've been hearing that a bunch, and I'm still. And then you say we have 35 acres of undeveloped land. I'm still trying to figure out, in town what that is. But my point is this: is that I think it's really important for us to recognize the reality that as a community, as a town, if we do not have the capacity to grow, 1 to 3% a year, then you're slowly going to be diminishing. I mean, it's a well-documented fact, and I could come up with statistics, but it comes down to a personal preference for the leadership of the community. Now, I pushed really hard for this study, and I'm glad that Andy showed up with the facts that he has. I mean, we have got to do something about this. This is an important issue for the community. It's not something that we can just go, well, we can't pay for it, so we can't do it. Well, we need to figure out a way to pay for it. Like, Tammy, I would ask you, how does the city of Escalon borrow $20 million? How do we do that? How do we finance a project like that?
Well, we would have to go out to the banks and go through that
Do you think it's
process.
impossible, or do you think there's a possibility? I mean, if I was a city, don't we have a good credit rating and all these things?
Yes, yeah, we do.
So banks would probably not scoff at us going, we need to borrow money to upgrade our infrastructure.
I mean, they're gonna look at your rates and make sure that your rates are up to date, just like we're doing the water rate study, the state's looking at that to make sure that you have the ability to pay back that loan figured into your rates.
So do you see the possibility of us going to a financing operation for this? Do you see that as a possibility at the very least? We could get the funding for this?
Yes,
Okay, so you said yes. And then Andy just described how we would save almost that money over the next 20 years. We would get that savings back by the maintenance fees that we're paying now, the connection fees that we would charge, and the various things up here. So to me, this seems like a pretty good deal. I think it's something we need to really consider.
Yeah, and to me, I think it's just a matter of math. And like I say, the reason that I'm not too wild about the domestic expansion is just knowing how the community feels. I don't know if that would just be a cost factor that you would count on at this point in time. But I think you're right, Councilmember Crumick. You got an old car. It's not getting any younger. It's not going to get any younger. And so the question is, now it's down to a matter of math. What would those rates be to be able to qualify for a loan? And I think that's probably the first question. And I don't know
If I could help for just a second,
Yeah,
I mean,
can you
it's
help
kind of
on that?
interesting that the city of Solvang, I mentioned them a little while ago, they're somewhat analogous. They don't have industries, and I think the thing maybe we're discounting here is I think the industries have an incentive to chip in on that 16 or 20 million, whatever it is. We have to talk about that as well.
They got over half the responsibility out there.
Right. But what I guess my point was is Solvang has about 0.7 or 0.75 MGD of domestic. Escalon has 0.5. The cost of the project that Solvang's looking at, the cost of the project you're looking at are about the same. They had a consultant who works in this area go down to Solvang and pitch at one of the city council meetings like this that I happen to be attending at. They showed all the different financing options, 20-year, 30-year, this rate, and it was somewhat reasonable. But there were rate increases for that. But that was on the backs of the existing payers only.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, what we're looking at too. I mean, I have the philosophy either you're going to pay me now or you're going to pay me later. And if you don't feel that you're going to be around in 20 years, that's not an excuse, okay? It's going to cost one way or another. I think Councilmember Crumick is correct. I think it's going to cost us if we don't do anything. So, we do need to do something. I think Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Alves is also correct. Do not plan on the growth as being part of a factor. So yeah, plan on it based on our overall population. Would that consultant be interested in looking at this situation?
Absolutely, yeah. I can pass along that information.
Yeah, I think if you can move forward on number crunching all you want. I mean, then if we can come to something that's feasible, fine.
Yeah.
But I think you gotta remember, the bottom line is money. That's your bottom line.
When we talk about grant funding and the Prop 1 funding, what amounts are available to us?
I'm not 100% sure. I have to check it out, so.
So, part of the agenda on Monday night will include the council recommending for our groundwater sustainability group to approve the groundwater sustainability plan for our basin. And part of the basin has projects in there, and our project for giving our water back to SSJID is included in that. So there's eyes on that project for funding in that mechanism too. So just kind of a FYI
You
on
can't really
that.
rely on that if you're not gonna improve this, because you need this to get that part on the water deal, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you're tying the two together, they're dependent upon each other.
I guess it was in reference to the potential of grant funding is why I was making that
Grant
comment.
funding and hopefully the sharing of the burden across the street there with the two different industrial plants would help some soften this thing up a little bit, because currently, that's a big number to crack.
I want to bring up a point here, and I don't know how this helps or hurts the situation, but if you think about what comes in the summer, 0.5 MGD of domestic at a really weak concentration. The industrial comes in at 2.1 of almost 10 times the load. So if you look at this big, huge plan with all this stuff we're proposing for $16 million, kind of a small fraction of it is domestic. I don't know how that helps or hurts, but.
If we can frame that in that frame, and we can have that reduced to numbers in terms of who pays for what, that makes a lot more sense. The onus cannot be on this town in its current situation with its population. It's not gonna fly. But if we can somehow find a way to put the responsibility where it belongs, and what you just said sounds like it don't belong here, it belongs across the street, I think we have a better shot of doing this. But I will tell you now, to do it 50-50 is not gonna fly.
So instead of 50-50, what are you suggesting, just so I'm clear?
Well, you're telling me, what percentage are they putting in there?
Yeah, I mean, it could be 90-10 or something like that in the summer.
Well,
If you look at the year
average it
on,
out, average it out, what do you got?
Could be,
60-40?
yeah, or 70-30, something
Okay,
like that.
That's 60/40 is what we use for math out there most
Annually?
of the time.
Well, that doesn't mean we have to use it now, Tammy, because things are changing. We're spending a load of money, and the onus is on them because they're the ones who created the problem.
So wait, is it 60/40, 60 industrial, 40
Correct.
domestic? So if we're gonna upgrade this facility and they're using 60% of it, that's a number to go off of when we talk about these upgrades that we wanna make.
Exactly. The onus should be on them, not this community. The community's not the one who's doing all the abuse or use out there.
Well, I think it's all interconnected. I understand what you're saying, but I think that if you extrapolate it out 10, 20, 30 years and you see a community that has healthy, slow, moderate growth, you'll see that the onus, it doesn't fall necessarily on the community because it will fall on the growth itself, on the developers and pay those fees and things like that. And I think that that's one thing that over the last 10 years, we've had virtually zero growth. And I think this is simply a,
So what's gonna change is my question. I understand your point, I don't disagree or agree with it. My point is, you're talking about things are gonna change. I wanna know how. Where are you gonna go, or how are we gonna get this community to agree to growth at a rate of 50 homes a year?
well,
or
that's,
whatever?
it's very simple because I think we forget what we've already done. So at our last community meeting, and it should all be discussed again at the council meeting if we're gonna do this again, so maybe some more people will hear it, but I asked the question directly, how many oppose to 75 homes a year? And the majority of people raised their hand and they're in favor of that. So I'm not saying we need to get aggressive about growth. I'm saying we need to get aggressive about our slow growth policy. We don't come close to, it's 75 a year. Andy's talking about 50 a year, which is well underneath what our current slow growth thing is. And as well as the annexing on, or the moratorium on annexing, that's something that we have to look at. We have to actually, we have to lift that. We have to lift that.
I'm gonna say that we need to review our current situation with the land we have within the city limits. We need to go out and reach out to the current landowners, and we need to present to them our options. And then if that doesn't work, then I maybe go into annexation. But I think once we present our case to them, and there's some sort of compromise involved, because I think the reason you're not getting a lot of development is the cost of it. The burden on the people in the town that own land is above what they're willing to sacrifice. So I think if we could compromise with them, we might get somewhere getting some of this 35 to 40 acres we have in the town developed.
It's, well, now it's, okay, I don't know if it's 35 to 40. I know that Windward Pacific that's building, they bought 22 lots. I think they've sold about half of them. These are $400,000 or $500,000 homes. People want to live in this community. And here's another thing really quick is the reason this is important is if we're going to annex, we need to show LAFCO and we need to do a municipal services review that shows we have the capacity to handle growth. And 250 EDUs, you know, I don't,
Yeah.
that's been thrown around, so.
You guys, if you guys don't mind, we're getting a little off the mark with what the focus is here, you know, this workshop. And I would make the argument that I don't think any of us up here are opposed to this at all. You know, it's just that, what are the numbers? How can it work? How can it be made to work? What are we looking at, you know, in terms of how to finance it? And what are we looking at, you know, potential sewer rates in order to show that we can finance it? And it sounds like to me that's pretty much where we stand right now. Okay, fantastic job. We know what we're up against. We know there will be many byproducts to this, you know, including, you know, the potential for more growth annexation, if we go that route. And so I think that's where we're at right
I
now.
think the report's excellent. I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
And the only concern I have again is how we're gonna pay for it.
You too.
And if we can find a way to pay for it where it doesn't cripple this community or blackmail them into doing something they don't wanna do, I think we could do this.
So I know we're gonna be accepting this at the next council meeting, Tammy, right?
Monday night, right?
Yes,
Okay,
Monday night.
okay. What other direction can we give at that time? Because again, it doesn't sound like anybody's opposed to this. We would just like to see what a potential, you know,
Well, I think we need-
financial plan would look like for
We
this.
need to get a financial, plan in place and see if it is acceptable. If we get to that point, then we move forward.
Right. And so your gentleman who looked at Solvang?
Solving, yes.
Solving,
Yep.
okay. Maybe that could be a potential consensus on Monday night
What
then.
kind of consultant?
It's a
was it?
firm out of Oakland and.
For what, though? Was it for the financing
Yes,
side of it?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And then my only other point was, I mean, I think I just got a little bit loose there with those numbers. So 16 million, and I kind of mentioned 20 million with the finance charges. That's if the domestic pays for everything, which I shouldn't have said.
Sure.
I mean, if we're splitting it 60-40, now we're talking about, you know, 6 or 7 million.
Yeah.
Now we're
Well,
Plus
that's the thing,
financing.
yeah.
So.
And if you don't mind, does anybody have in the audience have any questions? By the way, thank you guys for coming to this workshop, but if you have any questions, shoot.
You're gonna have to get mine.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Danny Fox, 1510 Adriana. Looking at the charts, there's about 6 choices. And Mayor Pro Tem Olives doesn't want to go to the 5th or the 6th. If you don't do anything, that eliminates 1. So it seems to me the council has about a choice of only about 1 or 2 choices.
But Danny, what I'm saying is, it's not that I'm in favor or not in favor of, what I'm focusing on is who's gonna pay for this. And then, once we decide on who's gonna pay for it, how much of it we're gonna pay, and how it's gonna affect the current rates and the people in this town, then I'll have a better concept in terms of which of these options I'm interested in. But to tell me you're gonna spend $20 million without telling me who's paying for what, it just doesn't work for me.
Well, I understand that. But on that same line, who's going to pay for it you've said 2 or 3 times, the people across the street should pay for it.
They should pay for the majority of it.
Well, absolutely.
I agree with that.
So whatever,
We need to know what that is.
so whatever plan that's chosen, they need to pay at least 50, 60, 70%.
I would agree.
Because this is the thing. Great job on your,
Yeah, it was a great.
Yeah.
great
it was
job.
awesome.
Yeah,
The information is all there.
yeah.
The money the city spent to get this awesome plan, if the people across the street weren't there, we wouldn't be here.
That's right.
That's true.
And so I think historically, the last 25 years, they've gotten a free ride.
I agree.
And so now the city's in dire needs. It isn't anything regarding a bribery or trying to overtax the citizens. It's trying to get the facility
I understand all that.
up the standard so we can get on the next 10 or 15 years without the citizens being able to
I
pay
feel
for
less
the whole
than-
bill.
I see the numbers.
Yeah, and Danny, I wouldn't say dire need. I would say, I think we're looking at an opportunity.
That's right.
We're looking at a possible long-term opportunity, which I think that's why, in my opinion, I think all these options are on the table. And if I can do something that's gonna get me 70, 80 years, granted, I won't live to see, most of the lifespan of this plant, but that's okay. Because if I can get something 70, 80 years out of something like that,
Well, the option to do
Hey.
nothing isn't on the table.
huh?
No.
What?
The option to do nothing is not an option. I mean, that's,
Right, no, I know, because it's still gonna cost you, yeah.
so back to my point. To do nothing, we can't do that. And if you don't want to go to the high end of the Cadillac plan, you're narrowed down to about one or two options.
Yeah.
And when across the street, both industries, finally after 25 or 30 years, pay their way, then that's going to take the burden away from every citizen on the domestic side.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Danny.
Yes, sir.
I don't disagree with anything you've said to this point, but I do want you to consider this. What happens if we get a commitment to subsidize this thing through those organizations, and all of a sudden one of them leaves or both of them leave? Then what happens?
Then you got a couple of,
an escrow account that would have to be funded before you proceed.
There you go.
Okay.
That's a good answer to the question.
Yeah, and back to the industries. This graph about the sludge, and I've said this for 10 years. The managers of this plant, they get their orders from their people from the main headquarters. They look at their worksheet and say, hey, that plant at Escalon, we want you to increase production 8 to 9% the next year. And they go out and they get the product and they do it and they fill up, they clog up our wastewater treatment plant while they're making money. So those plant managers get their orders on increased production. So it's very clear their sludge is not going through a whatever size tube. It needs to be about like so in these, in the summer months.
They're
No,
just doing their job. We need to do our job. That's the thing. We need to
exactly.
do our job.
Yeah, they need to pay their way, and if you're concerned about the citizens' rates going up, they won't go up as much if they begin to pay their way, the percentage to which they should. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I think it's a good comment. Thanks, Danny, and again, thanks, Andy, for the report. It's incredible work, and appreciate the knowledge and the expertise. It's not something, I know that people have been concerned this is another study or report that we're going to get, and it's going to sit on the shelf. We're not going to do anything with it, but I think we can't do that with this one. There's a significant need here. I would like to ask Justin to comment. Any ideas you have? What do you think about the report? What are your thoughts on all this?
You know, Andy and I have been talking a lot lately and coming through this, and I think the report, he did fantastic. I think he has so much information in there that's warranted. Honestly, in my opinion, I'm not for the Cadillac plan. I don't think we need to go 21 mil down the road. I think what he presented is, yeah, that's what we're gonna get and it's ideal. I don't think it's completely necessary for Escalon, but at minimum, I think that the alternative 2B or 2C, which is getting the flow to SSJID, getting us the facility down there. I mean, I know it's only 4 or 5 million, might as well spend 4 or 5 million, but I don't think it's really necessary in this case. But 1A, really, in my opinion, is not even an option. That's almost doing nothing.
Okay.
1B is by far the most minimum I would want to go, but I think 2B, 2C are fantastic ways to go for the city. for 75, 80 years.
I think another thing to think about is our relationship as a community with SSJID is very strong. It can get stronger through this partnership. A lot of the leadership there is local. They care about this town. They know our predicament. And if we can find a way to work with them on this, I think this would be a good relationship, and this might be a way to get there.
You know, in talking to SSJID, you know, I know Andy's done a lot, and I've talked with a few of them. They're always saying they're willing to do it, but honestly, when they're saying that, they don't think we're gonna do anything. That's why they're saying that. But they truly feel like if they're ready to jump on board right now, but they don't feel like they wanna waste.
Well,
Well, you
maybe-
guys are Escalon. You guys aren't gonna do
But
anything.
Yeah.
maybe we should consider the same thing
Yeah.
when we talked about the industries leaving or previous.
Sure.
We should do the same consideration with the South Weekend Irrigation, just getting a written commitment to it. So if we do this thing, we've got something
Sure.
substantial. Because what I hate to see is put all this energy to this and get all excited about it, and then boom, it's gone.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything's been said. We're all, yay, do it. But the bottom line is, we need to set the foundation in properly. We need to make sure we have an agreement with them, they're not leaving. They'll put money into escrow. We need to talk to SSJ, whatever the heck it is over there.
Yeah.
And make sure that they're on board with this thing. And then we need to figure out the numbers and disbursement of the numbers and whether or not, how that's gonna work out. Then we can talk about that, because that's really the bottom line here. Because we can pat each other on the back all day about the great idea this is and all that, that's fine. I think we pass that. Let's go and find out what the numbers are and move on to
Yep.
that.
Any final questions or comments?
I do. Tammy, what's the procedure to like set up a meeting with the industries? How does that all work where you start talking about things like this?
Call and
I'll
email,
set up a meeting.
yeah.
Is that something that we're involved with, or is that just kind of your thing?
It could be, two council members could be appointed to it.
I think it would be necessary if two council members.
We've been through this dance before.
Before or after numbers?
I think we get them during the process.
Okay.
I think I think they need to know how serious we are from the get-go.
Okay.
And with council there is what's gonna show them how serious we are in this.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, I think you sent it to them a couple days ago, though? This, just the PowerPoint, or not yet? I was curious if you got a reaction.
I know I notified them of the meeting, but I don't recall that I sent the report or the PowerPoint to
Okay.
them, honestly.
Okay. I was
No.
curious. So on day one of the project, basically, when we did a kickoff meeting, they were there. Eckert was there, Premier was there. I just wanted to report to you guys that they were just all over me about how much it costs. And I said, well, I'll just let you know that, you know, Sholo, Arizona, it was about this same size and about this, and it was about $12 million. And, you know, they,
We're that day with you.
Yeah.
were you? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah, we were
So anyway, the reaction wasn't perfect, but
That's too bad.
it's kind of what
Let
you
me ask you
said.
this, though, you know, at that same meeting, that same day, the gentleman from Eckert's, Thompson, I can't remember his first name right now. Pete, that's right. Pete was there and wasn't in a great mood, but the bottom line was he's also asking if he could move over his surplus because Manteca's shutting the door on him.
That's right.
So he's gotta expect some sort of a increase.
So they told me, Eckert told me about 4 days ago that they want 0.6 MGD. Alternative 2B only gets them 0.15, and alternative 3 would get them everything they need, all of 0.6. So if they truly need 0.6 MGD, then you do want to look at alternative 3.
And how badly do they want it?
Exactly.
What are they able to pay for it?
And what if there's another industry C out there that you don't know
You know,
about?
Well,
I think
yeah.
spread out with a big industry like this, the number's not so devastating. But at the same time, we have to get a commitment they're gonna be around to pay for it.
Right.
That escrow account's a great idea.
Tammy, what's the thing again? The city holds their, what, the permit
Permit. Up
to
Their
both those
industrial
things?
plant.
To send their stuff to our plant?
Correct.
We hold it right to the.
Is that is that like an annual renewal thing that they pay a fee or something?
Well, yeah, the permit fee's minimal, but, it basically sets, their rates were included in our sewer rate study.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be the other thing, not only looking at like the financing, but just as we've did with the water rate study, we included the connection to the surface water plant, to establish what that would look like, you know, those
Yeah.
costs. So that would be the other side of the coin is, you know, looking at a rate study for our sewer, which we're at the end of our 5 years for that too, so it's something else to reevaluate.
So those increased revenues would pay for something like this,
Potentially, yes.
whatever's left over.
Right.
As far as grants are concerned, is that something, Andy, you help with or not?
Not me, somebody else at my firm is good at that, but also this financing person that I'm recommending, she would be great as well, so.
I got a
Now,
final.
she helped Mountain House, by the way, so.
Oh, Mount Hope, yeah, I'm not, we talk about this and like, oh, okay, here's what we gotta do and who's gonna pay for this and the industries. I'm not about tapping industries for money. I'm all about, I'm very pro-business and, but I do think this concerns greatly the health of Escalon for generations to come. And I think it's very important. And that being said, whoever is using the most capacity, we have to work together. So I'm very, feel strongly about this, and I would like to be a council member on that group if that would be possible.
Yeah, none's for free, so.
So, and those are some like, actions, directions that you guys could give us in the meeting on Monday. Tonight's a workshop, so no action, direction, or,
Any other questions regarding this workshop tonight? No? Danny?
I have a question for Councilman Crummey. Did I understand you to say that you don't think that the industry should pay their way?
No, I said that I'm not trying to make them out to be like the bad guy, like, oh, they're using too much, so now they have to pay. I'm saying I'm very pro Premier Brands. I'm pro Eckerd, it's because of what else they do as far as jobs and the economics of it. But I am in favor of whoever is using the most capacity to pay that. So, no, I'm not saying that at all.
Because of the problem, Councilman Crummey, in the past years, as Andy indicated, the problem is to get a partner to comply. Just come up to the standards to which you're required to come up.
Right.
Mhm.
And so over a number of years,
Yeah.
how do you
The
deal with that?
last,
Right.
the last round we danced with those guys was not a pleasant one. And whether you're in the meeting or not, I can tell you right now, it's not gonna be pleasant this time around either. And it's intense, and I'll be honest with you, anything you pay Tammy, she earns in that one meeting. Because I'm gonna tell you something, they're not fun to deal with. We've dealt with them. Robert, I think it was last time, wasn't it?
No, it was you and Gary.
Me and
Yeah.
Gary.
Yep, you and Gary.
Well, I'm gonna tell you something, you better be prepared
All right,
because
you gotta pay to play, man.
Yeah, I'm not looking for I know none of us are looking for a fight. We're looking for a solution.
well, they don't come looking for solutions, they come looking for a fight.
And just one more point on that. I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm not sure if this works or doesn't work, but remember, Premier has to put in possibly another DAF unit, possibly a microscreen. They don't have any space, blah, 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 blah. There's an opportunity possibly to let them just keep doing what they're doing and move that screen to the wastewater plant, bump that number up a little bit, and just, they don't have to do anything at their facility.
And that might be a selling point. I mean, those things all help.
Yeah. I wanna thank everybody for coming tonight.
One more question.
Yes.
So, from Premier, I know John will probably ask, John, I don't know, he was saying today, but, of that portion of 60%, let's say, between plans 2C and 3, we're talking roughly, Premier's portion to be about 3 to 6 million in that contribution. With that contribution, from John's perspective, what would prevent Premier Brands from building a DAF system that's capable of producing Class C biosolids and recyclable water, so we don't have a discharge to the city?
Is that a question to Andy, or?
Sure, I mean, I can answer that
Okay.
question. I don't-
Hopefully, it's a question to Andy.
So yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem in doing that. I do want to say that you can remove the stuff that you can see pretty easily, but the stuff you can't see, there's just a ton of it. I mean, 3,000 milligrams per liter of COD, which is carbon, you're going to need big, huge biological reactors. So I'm not sure it's technically feasible. So
But I guess the answer too is that you're not required to discharge to us, but if you discharge to us, then there'll be requirements.
Yes, but
Yeah.
I guess part of it would be then what would Escalon's contribution be if we were to be self-sufficient in that matter? If we were able to,
Well, I think that would change the project scope too, because a lot of the demand that's being, considered in this is based on the demand from Premier.
I'm sorry, who are you?
Paul from, just the project manager over at
Kraft Heinz,
Oh, so you're sort of here for Premier,
yeah.
kind of, okay.
Kinda.
And the manager couldn't be here to? So let me just get straight what you said. You said if Premier was to become self-sufficient, not send anything to the city's wastewater treatment plant, you're asking what would
what would be, I guess,
the incentive for you guys to do that? interesting question, yeah.
That's a good question.
I guess my only reason why I'm asking that is to show up to our corporate team and say, we need to provide, let's say, on the high end, $6 million to the city of Escalon so that we can maintain our environmental standards. What would prevent Kraft Heinz, the premier, from investing that money directly into the site versus the city? So that I know would be a challenge.
Which I personally think that they're not gonna be able to do on their site for the ticket amount that we would be charging. And I think they kinda see that, what they're looking. I think if we're gonna charge 6 or 7, they're ultimately gonna be more around the 10 or 11 at their facility, so then they're gonna have to figure out,
'Cause they gotta expand.
they're gonna have to expand.
And they're gonna have to get their own state permit
I was just
then.
gonna say, then they're gonna have to do their own state stuff and all that, I guess, so there's gonna be more into it. So I think it comes down to it, if that's the way we're looking, that's great, let's look that way.
Yeah.
Let's let them do their own investigating on what it would take to do that, because it's gonna be tremendous.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, and that's the nice thing that you were able to show the whole report. You know, so everybody can look at their own options. Angela, you had a question?
Yeah, I think that's I worked for Camel Soup, and they went out of business because California had too many codes and too many restrictions.
I believe it.
Before we can ship water to Modesto, it had to be so clean. They got paid, we had to maybe pay $10,000. One time we paid $10,000 a month. And we had a refrigerator, and every often they take samples. They had a big jar, they take that sample. Now, he's industrial, he knows what he's talking about. You say he can't do that. They know what they can do. If they can bring water, come out of there, and go straight to the ponds, go into the river, or whatever it takes, I think we ought to give them a chance.
Sure.
I think they can do it. They got the money, big money, but they ain't gonna just give it away. And it'll be their own facility, and they can control it. All we gotta say, well, your water gotta be so clean. If it's not that clean, you're gonna pay a fine, so much more. I think that's a good idea. You might, they can spend
Yeah.
maybe 10 or 15 million dollars. I don't know what it's gonna cost, but like you said, it costs a lot, and they know it.
Well, that's the nice thing, yeah, that's the nice thing, Paul, about you being able to make it tonight, because now, I mean, it is what it is. The situation is what it is, so, and I think that we're all serious about finding a solution, and if they can find part of the solution within, great, if not, again, we all gotta find a solution, so. Are there any further questions, because I know the food's getting cold?
I do have another question. Sorry, one more. So if we were to go with 2B or 2C or even 3, what's the time frame, do you think, on getting something like that from start to finish?
Good question. So, yeah, I mean, I think, 24 months is probably pretty safe. Maybe 30
The
months.
time we get the financing, start paying for stuff?
Right, that's if you go design, bid, build.
And that would be through PACE?
We would compete. I'm sure you guys would have to do an RFP.
Be another
So,
RFP.
yeah, so if we decide we chose which avenue we wanted to go, then we would put it out for, an RFP to design it.
And this 12%
then-
is an estimated RFP cost.
And that
essentially.
includes permitting and construction management and design. That's
Okay.
right.
So that's so then you would do the design, you could do, after the design, then you would put it out to bid for construction.
You're saying 24 months?
Probably 30 months. I'd say 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you fast tracked it, you could do it in 24. But I
So
think 30
the other
months.
option
fast.
would be that you could put it out for.
It's taken us 11 months to get this study from
I
you,
know.
man.
Well, 5 months. Thank you.
Right.
But as Tammy was about to say, design build would be faster.
Right.
We did a design build project down in Santa Paula, and I think it was much faster than that. So
Okay.
Okay, hey, great job.
thank you very much.
Great
Yeah.
job.
thank you.
Let's eat.
There's food? So we're basically gonna redo all this again on Monday, right?
That's the guy's name. He's sitting
No,
he's
not
coming
to
back?
this point. I don't know.